for joining us for this episode of Talking Health in the 406, where we're one community under the big sky. I'm Trina Filan, a public health evaluator for diabetes and cardiovascular health.
And I'm Margaret Mullins, the Social Determinants of Health Program Manager.
Today, we're talking with Tracy Cook and Bobbi deMontigny, two folks from the Montana State Library, about how libraries are epic public health partners. Welcome, Bobbi and Tracy.
Hello.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Bobbi, can you talk a little bit about what your role is? What's your title and what do you do?
Yeah, I'm the lifelong learning librarian for the state of Montana. There is only one of me at the Montana State Library, so it can be a pretty big job because I serve libraries who are serving patrons from the ages of 0 until end of life. So it's everybody, and it's a bit the big role that I serve for MSL and for all of those libraries is with programming and making those connections, community partnerships, and being a resource for them when they want to run with something. So if they come to me with a project that they want to do, or they're collaborating with someone like you guys and they want to hear from you, we'll put something together so that we can make that happen.
Awesome. Thank you very much. How about you, Tracy? What's your role? What's your title? And what do you do?
I'm the lead consulting and learning librarian at the State Library, and I oversee our consulting, continuing education, and lifelong learning programs, and I'm also a working consultant. And so in that role, I will go out and visit libraries around Montana to assist them with library services, and I connect them to the programs that Bobbi offers. I also connect them to the work of other libraries and what they're doing around the state, which is one of the ways that I have come to help them with some of this public health stuff is some of their peers have been working closely with public health nurses, and I've been able to share those stories as they've mentioned similar issues in their communities.
I think it would be helpful if I give a little background information about our work with libraries and the importance of libraries in our communities when it comes to health and well-being. Our chronic disease prevention programs have been partnering with the Montana State Library for a couple of years now. We started with some introductory conversations and soon discovered a lot of overlap in our interests and abilities to reach the public. There have been several projects that have been born out of those discussions. Libraries, we know, make excellent public health partners because they're trusted and accessible and deeply embedded in their communities, making them ideal for health outreach and support. So here's some of the things that we know. Libraries reach all generations and the whole family. It's a one-stop shop of sorts for good information, activities, and social connection for every group. Libraries also are free to use, typically centrally located, often have Wi-Fi access, and often are willing to provide health-related access to patrons, like allowing people to use private rooms for telehealth appointments. We know library patrons trust libraries to give them good information. Patrons often go to libraries to ask and do research on health-related questions. Libraries can help those patrons find reliable sources of information. So, do you think that libraries tend to see themselves as health partners? This question is for either or both of you.
I think it probably depends on the library. I know that they see themselves very much so as hubs of information and accurate, good information and a trustworthy place people can go to get that information. And then some libraries consider themselves to be more so a hub because they have provided those special spaces for telehealth and things, and others maybe aren't explicitly doing that, but still have resources that can be used to that end.
That's been my experience as well. It really varies by library. Some libraries, I think it started very organically. They had a connection with their public health nurse who happened to mention, hey, I have some funding. I'd really like to get more information about mental health resources out into the community. Could we connect with one another? And things like that seem to lead to a more structured partnership with public health nurses and others in the medical field.
Margaret's job here is to make sure that folks understand how broad health is, right? That impacts to health can happen from many different directions in a person's life or in a community, right? And so before we get into some of the specific projects that we've been working on together, I thought it would be cool for you all to talk about how libraries may be inadvertently helpful to people's health. Libraries can help reduce social isolation, which is a determinant of health, right? How connected we are. It's an intergenerational place. And a library can help contribute to health literacy. And that's important because people need to understand the information that they get so they can make good choices. So, could you please talk a little bit about how libraries, in a really broad sense, even if they don't actively engage in a public health project, are good for people's health?
I was fortunate enough to go to a session, Margaret and Trina, that you did about the social determinants of health. And right away, I was like, oh, this is totally what libraries do without even knowing about it. And I would say one of the things I really love about libraries is their ability to bring people together and provide that human connection. So I remember when you talked about social isolation and its impact on mental health and physical health, which I don't know that everyone realizes. I thought, oh, wow, that is proof that libraries, just by existing and bringing people together, really help address that particular issue. And you're right, they do provide a lot of intergenerational programming. In fact, that's something Bobbi and I have talked about wanting to more actively encourage. The other thing I think that they do that I remember when you talked about the social determinants of health was the importance of access to good information. And not just that, but actually good food and things like that. And a lot of libraries on their own, I think without even really considering the health aspect of it, have engaged in community gardens. And so they are helping people have access to good food and certainly are very interested in having access to good health information. And many of them, before there was even kind of a emphasis or grants for telehealth, those who really are in rural areas started to even open the director's office up and help people get access to telehealth, people who maybe would have struggled with it in the past.
The seed libraries definitely come to mind when Tracy was talking about community gardens. That's another way. The teens in Drummond actually did a service program through their library where they were looking for something that they could do through a partnership with Humanities Montana. And through that program, they got together and looked at the needs of their community. They did a little survey. And they figured out that folks who don't have transportation are having a hard time getting groceries because it is such a long distance that some of them have to go. So they coordinated a grocery delivery service to kind of create this last mile delivery situation so people could really get access to good food based on this whole outreach program that started in their library.
Wow.
That's amazing.
That is really, really cool. So, are there other examples of specific libraries that have done stuff that's like that? Whether it's like a story walk that incorporates physical activity or some sort of intergenerational thing, you might want to also explain. And then Tracy, that must be your job to kind of tell other libraries, like, hey, Drummond did this. Here's an idea. So, can you talk a little bit about that stuff?
Similarly, through that same program, Humanities Montana has something called the Democracy Project, where the teens can come and do some civic leadership in their communities where they assess what their communities need. And that's what that whole program was that they did in Drummond, too. But the teens in Helena ran a clothing drive for veterans, too. So that's another sort of intergenerational thing through that kind of work. And I know that there are many story walks going on. Tracy, being out on the field, might be able to point to a specific, but if not, I will see if I can pull one up for an example.
Yeah, in terms of story walks, which is where the library posts large images, usually of children's picture books, and you walk to each page, and parents and kids can enjoy it together. And the Great Falls Public Library has one set up in Gibson Park, and they change it out every month. The Dillon Public Library did a partnership with multiple community organizations to create one that was almost like an adventure walk. So they're another great example. And then the Lewistown Public Library is one of the more recent ones that created a story walk along kind of a walking trail as well. And so they are a great way for parents and caregivers and kids to kind of come together and see what's going on. And then the other thing related to that democracy project is I believe the James E. Shanley Tribal Library had a very active group, and they worked on a playground for their kids, which was kind of a wonderful idea for that activity and exercise, and also giving the kids a safe place to go.
I was just pulling up some other story walks. It looks like there's one in Havre and also Fort Pratt.
Those are really, really good examples of how libraries can do a whole bunch of different things and may be inspired by other external partners, work with other external partners to carry out some cool projects.
Speaking of cool projects, we have done some pretty fun projects with all of you. And I just want to talk about some of those so listeners can find some of the resources for themselves. So, Bobbi, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the virtual trunks, what they are and how they work.
Absolutely. I am really excited about these. These came about after, oh gosh, so we had physical trunks for a very long time, and the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in Montana Wild still have those. So I don't want this to sound like they can't have these resources anymore. They're just not coming straight from the Montana State Library anymore because we've downsized. We've got a much smaller location and we just didn't have the storage space to facilitate that anymore. But in their place, we've created some virtual trunks. And among them, it started with a bat trunk because that is really popular. Along with that, we've created other things to promote that intergenerational program types of formatting. We've got the Montana History Portal Lego Challenge, where people can get together in their community and get together at the library and build things based on what they've seen on the Montana History Portal. And that brings in people from all generations because you've got the folks who like the history side of it. You've got the kids who like building with Legos, and that comes together to create a whole community event. Other things in there include smoke event safety. We worked with your folks there at DPHHS to talk about that a little bit. We did a program. She came and spoke, and then we put together a trunk tied into that sort of work. And then the one that you're probably most into right now is that health literacy trunk. And so in this trunk, we have kind of a basic overview. What is health literacy? And then there's just scads and scads of resources that libraries can use and patrons can use to just look up different things, anywhere from like the Alzheimer's Association, Medline Plus, Indian Health Service, Health for Teens and Middle Schoolers. It's just everything across the board that we can find. In fact, I worked with you guys to fact check me a little bit, make sure I was using really good resources that you recommend. So thank you for that. And then in the programming section, we have plug and play programming that libraries can use, or other organizations too. It's an open website. Anyone can use it, but they can grab a programming template for something that they want to do in their library, and it tells them everything that they need to do. So the one right on top, for example, is becoming a caregiver, and there's a program description. As people live longer, younger, older adults are caring for their older adults. Very often, they're still taking care of children or grandchildren too. And this is a program that's designed to help that sandwich generation cope. It gives participants the opportunity to share their concerns and possibly find kindred spirits among the group. It brings resources to people that are finding themselves in a caregiving position. It also creates a place where people can gather and work on that social isolation aspect. And it talks about the fact that people in this time in their lives, they're very, very busy. They might not have other times where they can get out with people who are experiencing the same thing as them. So it gets them all in the same place. And then this template gives you topics that you could bring in and talk about. And then it has a list of different speakers you can bring in, and all of those are linked. So it has different people who have in the past come to places and talked or are willing to talk. And then it also links to the different agencies on aging in each of the areas in Montana. So there's people who are somewhat local to the area who might be able to come in. It tells them how long they would probably want to set it up for. They have some links in here to learn about the topic, and then some notes about what you can do to make it special. And then there's some links to some different sites. One is on protecting older consumers, and another is on the National Library of Medicine, their elder care book list and other resources. And then just some recommendations on marketing and things. So that's just one example of one of those programs that you can just go to the site, pull out that template, follow the guidelines, and bam, you've got a program.
That is incredible. I just am so impressed that is so readily available to librarians, and we know how busy they are. So to be able to pull up a template like that and have a ready resource for the public is really amazing. Tracy, do you have anything to add about the library trunk?
Just am so impressed with Bobbi's work on them and making them accessible and fun for the libraries to use. And it's quite enjoyable for me to show them the virtual trunks and what they can do with it.
Do they tend to give you any feedback? Have you heard from any of your folks you work with about them?
Yes, actually, they do really enjoy them, particularly Bat Week. That's actually probably the most popular.
How can you not like Bat Week?
I know. And the other thing I think is, I think sometimes it inspires them, even if they don't use the program template, they will be inspired by it. For instance, I remember the Harlowton Public Library having actually a death cafe, so people could kind of talk and process death and what they need to think about and how they need to prepare for that. And so I think that's the other piece of it, is not only just them using it, but also being inspired by it to try different things as well.
I'll just mention too, Trina and I are in the process right now of creating another trunk. It's the chronic disease awareness trunk. So we'll be having information in there from our diabetes, cardiovascular health, asthma, lifestyle wellness. Our different programs will be in there. And hopefully some of that would correlate with health months, right? So when you have a heart health month or a diabetes month, that trunk can be pulled up for resources for the librarian. So hopefully that'll be helpful. And then also the Heart of Healthy Communities Toolkit is a resource that has been created here at the Chronic Disease Bureau. It's a community asset building toolkit. I won't go into too much detail, but we'll create a link for it on our site. But it's a good resource for both community and healthcare to develop resources for working more closely together. Another great project that I think we should talk about are the blood pressure kits. I wondered if either of you could talk a little bit about that from your perspective.
The blood pressure kits sort of started this whole thing with us. Really, we got together and talked about ways that the library could work with public health. And it spawned so many things, but we had that virtual program, the Connect to Thrive, that Tracy had talked about, came out of that. And then we started working together, talking about what we could do with the toolkits for the blood pressure cuffs. And we talked about what needed to be in them. We settled on the blood pressure monitor, the cuff, a pedometer, and then some information in those kits that people can use, a log sheet to record readings that they've got, checking their blood pressure. And we managed to get them out to 16 catalog locations showing up. So when you go to that website on the lifelong learning page, you can click on that and see where you can get one and even reserve it directly from there if that is one of the settings they have set up in that library. And in the notes in the catalog, it says what all is in there.
That's perfect. And again, Tracy or Bobbi, I don't know if you've heard back from libraries about those blood pressure cuffs and how useful they are.
In Montana, we have very tiny libraries all the way up to much larger libraries. And the blood pressure kits almost seem to fall in that medium range where you had multiple staff, I think, probably to be able to assist the patron. Some staff have just kind of expressed concerns about helping people and doing it right. And that's why I think our next step in that might be working with like the local public health nurse and or some very open-minded, willing medical professionals, just kind of reassure people in order to be able to get that usage and to get the word out as well. So that's kind of what I've heard so far. I don't know, Bobbi, if you've gotten more specific feedback.
I have. They have wanted some kind of pre-made promotional things because they've got some communication out there in the library. They're putting it up on bulletin boards and things. But I think, like Tracy said, getting that cooperation from the medical professionals and sending people back to the library for that, or getting that, getting the word out in places that isn't already the library, because they're probably telling the same people over and over at the library, where getting the word out elsewhere is probably going to help really drive the usage for those.
That's really good feedback, because the purpose of these cuffs is to help people who may not be able to get to a clinic or a healthcare provider during regular business hours have access to a blood pressure cuff so that they can monitor their pressure for a given amount of time and see how they're doing, right? And then they can interact with their healthcare provider if they're worried about their blood pressure. There's an instruction book in the kit to understand blood pressure. So the goal is better partnership between patient slash patron and clinical provider, right? But this is sort of a way to have access to this tool in a way less, hopefully a less stressful way.
Yes, I would agree with all of that. I do know some flyers were sent out to the clinics and the communities where the kits are. But I think sometimes, like Trina just said, it is something they are not necessarily used to doing for themselves, taking their blood pressure. And the librarians, although they're not responsible for teaching the patrons how to take their blood pressure, may feel much more comfortable understanding that process. So more education for them so that they can answer some questions or at least direct them in the right way, I think is really good feedback. Is very good feedback for those toolkits and a good reminder for other health resources that we might put into the library.
Yeah, I think that that sounds like a project for us to work on this winter.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will just say this project was inspired by a project in Wyoming. I'd like to give them a little credit there. And the Montana State Library has been most generous in our ability to be able to put those kits out there. So we appreciate that very much. I have a couple more things that I'm thinking about that we have done with the libraries. One of them is your monthly newsletter, which we regularly contribute to. We have what's called the Social Determinants of Health Corner, and we really do appreciate the ability to communicate and share with the public librarians all over the state. I wonder if you can just tell us how long that's been going and how it is received by the libraries.
Yeah, we have had the lifelong learning newsletter specifically for over a year now, going on maybe a year and a half. Part of our conversations, the same conversations that led to that Connect to Thrive talk and the blood pressure cuffs, we also talked about that blurb going out in the lifelong learning news. And the lifelong learning newsletter reaches, say, about 1,500 people, library staff and volunteers each month. It's usually very library focused people who get that newsletter, but it is going out to let them know what's going on in social determinants of health. It's familiarizing them with you, Margaret and Trina, so they can reach out if they want to do something. It's been a great place to get more interest about the different health literacy trunks. It was the prime place where we solicited to find out who was actually interested in having a blood pressure cuff. As you can see, there's been a good response to that. Some of the talks going out and some of the links about the trunks going out in the newsletter has definitely driven up the usage of those virtual trunks. I think about between the smoke safety and the health literacy trunk, we've got about 770 hits of people opening and utilizing those resources. And all that advertising comes out of that newsletter.
That's amazing.
That's so good.
I count on Bobbi to have the statistics at hand.
Yes.
I think it is pretty amazing to see the usage of it. And actually, this conversation reminds me that we certainly put the push out in the beginning, but of course, this. It's like you always have to kind of go back and remind people because people change or they don't know or they weren't ready for the information at that time. And so this has inspired me to go, oh, yeah, Bobbi, we should talk about just another refresher on those virtual trunks and the health literacy resources, just to keep reminding people.
I was thinking the same thing. As we're getting into those winter months, I'm starting to think about less in-person stuff and more of my webinars and things. And I think it's about time to bring that in. And now that we have the trunk with all of the templates to do a program, the libraries in many cases have the blood pressure cuffs. We can talk about programming in the library as one more thing that is a little bit more cohesive with all of these parts that they can bring together.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. And when Tracy mentioned sometimes people aren't ready to sort of receive one particular piece of information right when they're given it, I think that's really good point too. There's a whole lot of things that can be revisited. And it's just a reminder that there's so much good information out there and it's worth repeating. All right, Bobbi, you also reminded me of one more thing, the monthly webinars. Trina and I did participate in that with the Connect to Thrive, and we enjoyed having an opportunity to talk to the libraries. When we were in Harleton, the librarian was explaining how much they do look forward to those webinars. They bring people in, and they're a really good opportunity to sort of share resources. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about those webinars.
I would be delighted to talk about those. We are in peak webinar season now. Kickoff was on September 25th. We usually do these in the end of the month. So just kind of depending on the readiness for it. In December, there will be a cybersecurity and online safety talk. January is history of Montana laws with the law librarian, Franklin.
How do people access this resource? And so you can register, right? And but then if you miss it, there are also recordings, right?
We have this whole series listed out on the Montana State Library webpage. And then in the month leading up to it, it's all over our social media. And then any libraries who want to co-host with us will get an invitation link and they'll be pushing that out on their social media too. And what's really cool is if you're listening to this and you look it up and your library happens to be pushing these out, you can check with them and see if they're actually going to be doing a watch party in their library, because some of these libraries do. And that's really fun. And then if they aren't doing a watch party, they still are sending out the information so that their patrons can tune in and watch from their computers at home. So there's many ways to access this. Check your library's social media, check your library website, and check the Montana State Library social media, and there will be a link to the virtual programming series in the notes about this show. I'm real excited about this. It's so much fun to get all of these different experts in to talk about all of these things. And then the best part is we open it up so the attendees can ask questions in the chat and engage in real time with the speakers. So it also helps with that social isolation a little bit. Even if you're at your house, you're still hanging out with people who are interested in the same thing. And it's pretty cool.
Bobbi and I have been really thinking about how to make sure we have that social connection piece with this. And it's kind of been the next iteration of the virtual programming. And that's why we've really been trying to emphasize those watch parties, because past libraries that did that said that the the conversations were so engaging, and people were talking to each other that maybe knew each other casually, but didn't realize that they shared the same interest in mushrooms or dinosaurs or whatever. And and that's very fun to hear. And so Bobbi and I have really been trying to think about how to emphasize that piece as well using technology.
Love it.
Yeah, that's great.
On that note, you did ask about the recordings, and we are moving in more of a direction to get people connecting and showing up and participating in real time. So actually, the recorded piece is not the model that we're following anymore.
It's a selection of really cool resources. And, especially since Montana is giant, right? It's a giant place. It's hard sometimes for people to get into a central location to join a watch party. But if there are ways to enhance their experience of a presentation together, that's worth exploring. Is that a hard thing to accomplish? Or do we have better technologies for that?
We're using Zoom webinar to accomplish that, but it seems to be working really well. One of the nice parts about that is whether it's a watch party and it's the librarian translating the questions to chat and then the speaker is addressing the room, or it's an individual, it keeps that conversation going from all parts of the state, and it's bringing people together from different perspectives. A cool example of this was the native plant program we just did, because there are different plants all over, and Montana is so big. We've got many different microclimates. And so in one section, she was talking about sweetgrass, and people like, oh, sweetgrass, I know all about that. And then they were sharing their books that they like. Braiding Sweetgrass came up, and then they started sharing other books by that author. And then all of a sudden they're talking about some other plant that shows up in another part of the state. And then it's like, oh yeah, so-and-so talks about this. And there was just so much networking going on. It was cool. And then at the end, not right at the end, it takes a day or so to gather all the information, but everything that everyone talked about in the chat, I look through all of that, and then I send out a resource list to everyone who registered for the program. So at the end, they'll get to see all of those different resources. Maybe someone will mention, oh, there's a YouTube speaker and a series of videos that someone does on the impacts of mining in Montana. And what does that mean? And then I'll add that to the resource list. So then people can see all of the things that were discussed as kind of a tickler to remember that, and then make those connections with those other things that can expand their interest.
I am really excited that we've had this conversation because I need to get registered.
Yeah, I do too. I was like, I got to get signed up. How have I? Don't want to miss any of these.
Ridiculous to miss.
You don't get to sign up for once and then get all of them, though. You do have to sign up for each one. That just helps me get a count of who's actually attending. So.
Okay.
Good to know.
That is a good additional note. Cool. Well, we also know that there are a bunch of other projects that you all have been involved with. There are a couple that you specifically have mentioned before, and there might be some other ones that are on your mind. But let's talk a little bit about creative aging. And that's a partnership between libraries and the Montana Arts Council, right?
Yeah, so it's between libraries and the artists, and it's this whole kind of system that we're kind of putting together for this. We have an intern we've just hired, and they're coming in to really work on and develop a web page for us where they're going to get the different artists who want to work with us and put them all up on the site, and then link to all of the information libraries would need to contact that artist and bring that person in to their library. Sometimes, depending on funding and whatnot, the state library can help out with some of those costs, and sometimes not. But at any point, a library should be able to reach out to an artist from this site when it's built and find someone to come in. And then when I say come in, that's someone who would come to the library and do a series of maybe around 6 classes, starting with introductory things up to the point of a completed project. And those classes would be for seniors to come into their libraries and meet the artist, learn how to do something new, work on that social isolation bit because they're all there together, making friends with people who do the same types of art that they are interested in. So there's that aspect of bringing someone into the library and creating things together. And then at the end, they also have a culminating event. And this is what makes it really cool, I think, because these people have come to this program over the course of probably 6 weeks and learned something new and created something. And then they get to present the thing that they created. So in some cases, like one library did a lovely gallery sort of demonstration where they had all of their pieces up and they got to invite their friends and family in to go see everything that they made. And it was framed and it was beautiful and just fantastic. Another got together and did a writing workshop, and then those writers then got to read their pieces to their friends and family who gathered to listen to them. And I loved that because they got platformed as someone up on stage that was getting to read something that was meaningful to them, to people that they cared about. And the testimonials and the feedback we got back from this were just, let's see, I have one here. Even though I've lived here for 30 years and know these people when I see them in the grocery store, they were more like acquaintances. It is really nice to be in an art making space with them. I did not know that this was an interest for them, and now we have something in common. And then another, I enrolled because I wanted to spark my creative side, long dormant and maybe even dead. I now have the desire to document noteworthy events in my life, passing on a priceless gift to my children and grandchildren. Isn't that lovely?
That's amazing.
Wonderful.
It really, really is. Those are great testimonials. I love it.
Tracy, do you have anything you'd like to say about creative aging? Because you're probably watching it unfold on the ground in a lot of different places.
Yes. When we first started this partnership with Montana Arts Council and Lifetime Arts is a national organization dedicated to this cause. And they had really robust data about the power of bringing older adults together and using art and how that actually addressed both physical health issues as well as, of course, the social isolation and mental health issues as well. What's fun is to see it in action and to see people really engaged and loving it so much that they found a way as a group, for instance, in Glasgow, to continue it with the teacher, who actually said, you know what? I don't feel like I'm a teacher so much as I'm one of you. And so the artist became like a student with the other students, and they're a group together. And it's really very powerful to see that and to see kind of the smiles on people's faces. And it reminded me, we haven't talked about this, but many libraries have worked with the Alzheimer's Association. And there was an exhibit that was going around from an artist who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he was documenting kind of his process. And it reminded me of a story from Sydney Richland County Library where they hosted that exhibit. And a woman came with her mother who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And she was like, I felt like our story was represented. And it still chokes me up when I hear her talk about how that brought them so much comfort and connection. And that is certainly something that many Montana families are struggling with, is caring for older adults and older adults who may be diagnosed with dementia as well. And the arts and their ability to give people an outlet is really pretty powerful as well.
I think that's a really beautiful way to put into action what is actually a complex web in any community, right? No matter how large or small, there are resources that can connect to help people thrive, right? It doesn't matter whether you think you don't have anything or, oh, we've done that before. There's always somebody in a position to be able to say, let's try this. Or, hey, I saw this in another town that's like ours. Let's try this out, right? And I think that's one of the beautiful pieces about adding libraries in to the idea of health and well-being, right? That that this is this central place of trust where all kinds of cool things can happen and all kinds of expertise can blossom. There was something that you all mentioned when we were talking about what we wanted to talk about during this podcast. And I think it was Tracy. You had an example of something that happened in Rebo that you wanted to share.
Yes, when I went to work with the Weibo Library on something completely different, she took me over to meet the public health nurse because she said the public health nurse has been an incredible partner with the library. And so I asked Mindy, the library director, about that. And she said the ways that the public health nurse and the library have partnered together have included grants to purchase books on particular health topics. The health nurse has come over and actually led a story time for kids, just kind of focusing on kids and health. The public health nurse is also, I suspect, because of that human connection and the recognition of how important that is, has helped host events that bring community members together to just reduce social isolation, and has also helped the library obtain some technology, I think, again, to help with access to the resources and access to telehealth as well. And I realized after I gave you that example that I think up in Glacier County, a very similar thing happened. And it started with just a grant with mental health, and then it grew into more and more opportunities. It's kind of like once the public health nurse and the library works together, they find other ways that they can connect with programming and access to resources as well.
That's really interesting. I love that example.
It is. What I love is how it blooms. One thing just leads to another. When you mentioned that the art instructor, for instance, became a partner, that it can go both ways, and that these different programs lead to other programs. It's really the whole idea, and it encapsulates everything we're talking about in terms of what libraries can actually do in a community. I would like to take a moment to talk about a project. Tracy, you have already referred to it, a project that we did a while ago on the perceptions of rural and frontier Montanans of their health and the health in their communities. And we were invited to sort of share our findings with the Sagebrush Federation of Libraries in Eastern Montana. We thought that that was such a great opportunity because we got to talk with all those librarians about how community health is such a strong indicator of individual quality of life, and how the libraries can play a role in making communities better places to live. You referenced this also, but you explained the term social determinants of health. It's certainly not new. It's just a terminology for things that we have understood and lived with for a very long time. And so it's great to bring that information as well as the greater picture to different libraries. And I'm just wondering if each of you can speak to that idea of community health and quality of life.
As I mentioned earlier, I was really struck. I mean, you're right, social determinants of health. When you said it, I was like, of course, all of these things do help contribute to people's well-being. But I think there was something about the way you said it and that you organized it. And I was just maybe working with Bobbi and in the programming and the aspect of it in the libraries, and saw the role that libraries really can play. And I think that conversation later on, those librarians that were in the room had kind of started to talk about doing some different programming. And one of them reached out and was like, I had tried this walking program, but it didn't go very far. And this kind of inspired me to try that again, but maybe try it at a different time or advertise it differently. And so I think what is interesting is it's kind of like it's a big picture concept, the whole social determinants of health. But of course, the reality of it is in the details and how you work that out. And that's where maybe the libraries can help. And where I think your own resources and the virtual trunks and so forth is like giving them, okay, here's that concept of social isolation, or here's the concept of access to good food, but here are the concrete ways that you can actually make that happen. And I think that is something that we are really working with libraries to try and identify better.
I am not on the ground, so I am more on the angle of, again, connecting people to resources and those partnerships. And you guys have been doing the CVH, the cardiovascular health collaborative meetings. And for me, that has been putting me in contact with the different people who are also trying to, meet the same goal and address these same issues. And one of the exercises we did in there was talking about the different resources and how we could put everything together. And it kept coming up that there would be some kind of a van, a community resource that would be somewhere, right? And they were like, where would this community resource be? And of course, this is like we're brainstorming here. I'm not saying that this is a thing that's happening. Don't be scared, librarians. I'm not parking a van in your parking lot, right? Who has a place where this van would go? And it came up that there's a library in every county, right? Everyone's got a library. Maybe the van would go there. And so it was an exercise in thought about how all of these different areas can come together to create something that can really solve problems. And in some places, they're doing it. I know that Billings had a huge role during the COVID situation. And at the time, the director there had talked about wanting to provide some sort of health clinic situation for overflow, but he didn't really have it figured out. He was just like, we are here for you. Tell us what you want. And it turned out that what they really needed was a place to watch all the children of the nurses and the healthcare professionals who were working all of these overwhelming hours and over and above what a regular daycare would provide. So the Billings Library then turned their big meeting room into care for all of these nurses, and it enabled them to be able to do the work that they needed to do. And then they didn't have to repurpose the library into a place that had ill people coming into it to be seen. Instead, it was, okay, we're going to watch these kids and free up capacity elsewhere. And so it's just one of those things where within that state of brainstorming, the web of connection is so big, and libraries are such an integral community resource that sometimes those conversations start one way and turn out another. But all of that to say that they are very, very deeply involved in however it works out.
That's great information. I think you're right about that. And again, libraries crop up as a resource, like you said, even if it doesn't start there. When people think about community and where we can link, libraries are always a part of that equation, or should be if they're not.
We have been talking a lot about how libraries play an important role in community. Sometimes other people in other positions don't recognize that, right? And once a partnership begins, like the public health nurse connecting with the public library, it becomes more obvious and maybe easier to come up with ways to partner. But how can local organizations that have ideas and maybe want to start seeing their library as a partner, how can they go about creating those partnerships? How do they think outside of their regular boxes and then go and broach these subjects? Also knowing that, or maybe we can also talk about how libraries might be able to go and approach partners that they might not regularly work with. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that not every library has lots of staff and is open all the time, right? There are limitations and constraints that everybody has to work within.
I think that the first step would honestly just be saying, this is what I hope to accomplish. This is one way that you can achieve your goals as a community spot for gathering, for information, for reducing social isolation. How can we come together and make this happen? And so the first step, I believe, would just be the conversations, and whether folks wanted to have those conversations me or with their local librarian. There are many ways to have those conversations. I would think that locally, because in some of these smaller areas, a lot of folks already know each other and might not already realize that they have an overlap of interest and goal, that those could probably start at the local level. But I'm not saying that they can't reach out to me too. I could certainly bring it back around to a librarian if they wanted to.
I would agree with Bobbi. The first step is whether it's the library or the community organization is talking to each other. And, MSU Extension, and I cannot remember the name of it, but they do this rural planning where they bring all these different community organizations together. And the stories I have heard about the partnerships forged from that are just great. I mean, some of it's economic development, but as we've been talking and as I've been thinking about your question, Trina, I think the most successful ones are where we identify the purpose. And if it's the purpose is to reduce social isolation, or if it's to connect people, or if it's just simply to share resources together, then that purpose helps us identify what partners. And I think one of the things we've been trying to work with libraries to think about is who else might care about that issue. And I guess I would encourage other community organizations to think about if you're working on some issue, who else might care about that, and could the library be a place? And maybe the role of the library is just to provide the space for others to come together to work out the problem and come up with a solution. But sometimes the role of the library is to actually be a partner in the solution and be a more active participant in that. And that's just obviously a follow-up conversation as well. And I want to thank Bobbi because she just shared the name of that program. It's Reimagining Rural. And that is a wonderful program for small communities in Montana to participate in. And it's very, very, very community wide. It's going to go farther than health. It's also going to talk about economic development, but really at its core, it's about the well-being of the community and the community thriving.
We had a connection with Tara Mastel from there, and she offered a talk. It actually was either, I'd have to go back and look, it was either right before or right after the Connect to Thrive talk, and those two topics just came together so beautifully.
You both have really kind of hit upon something that I was going to ask you about next. It has to do a little bit with the connecting the dots. So the network of National Libraries of Medicine, we've learned a lot from them. They have some great resources too to help connect the dots between libraries and health. And you've mentioned some of these already, but I'm thinking a little bit more about some of the local organizations and the partnering with the libraries, and maximizing that effect, and being able to think outside the comfort zone. This is not so much you two, because I think you already think outside of the comfort zone and how to integrate libraries, but encouraging the public to think about the libraries as a greater entity. One of the examples that comes to mind for me are these telehealth booths that are in libraries. People might know they have Wi-Fi at libraries. They might even know there's something telehealth related, but there are some libraries that have isolated, rooms just for privacy and for those connections, and helping the public sort of recognize that they can think outside the box. I'm just wondering if you have any extra feedback about that.
There is an information guide on libraries and telehealth, and there's an overview about it and considerations that libraries might want to think about if they're going to do this, and a little guide on room setup and things like that. And it's based off of the Idaho Library Telehealth 101 guide. So that is, and there's some best practices and things in there. So if you are a library looking to do this, there are some sources to help you and guide you through how that might look and how to set that up.
I think this is something that we as librarians could be better about, and how we talk about our services and what people can get from it. So I feel like I don't actually have the greatest of answer to you. I think it's something we're still trying to figure out, to really let people know that libraries are no longer, just books, that they have changed, and that they can be a place where you can come and connect with others. And I know that social media is definitely a platform that more and more libraries are using, but that also only reaches a certain number of people. And so I think we still need to work that out. I would love that. I would love to figure out how to kind of encourage community members to think about the library. And I also think this is something librarians have mentioned. I'm curious to know if it's come up in public health as well. It's like people are a little bit reticent to interact with one another. They whether their skills got rusty or just the stress of modern life, they aren't as comfortable connecting with one another in public spaces. And yet, I think many of us recognize the importance of that. And so that's another challenge to that I think we're wrestling with. It's not just lack of knowledge, it's almost like a hesitancy on the part of people to come and interact in that way.
That's such a great observation, Tracy. Certainly post-COVID, some of that came into play, but it's been there before that as well. So many libraries have little coffee shops now, little places to make that connection a little bit more comfortable, which I think is great.
Can you talk a little bit about winning in Winnet?
The residents in Winnet, there aren't many of them, I think under 200. They were at one point going to lose their county. It was going to be dissolved. And then through that reimagining rural sort of process, they worked together to come up with some ways to turn things around. They now have a Beef to Schools program. There's a YouTube video about that I can share, but that wasn't necessarily through libraries, but it was through that reimagining rural program.
I think that is all of our questions. We're sort of winding down here, but is there anything else that either of you might like to discuss or bring up for our listeners?
Obviously we know about and think about really large community events, but a lot of what we've talked about today is small stuff. And I think the small steps can really make a big difference in people's lives.
Absolutely. When I talk about all of these different programs that are either being done by libraries or programs that the Montana State Library is helping with to help facilitate movement among libraries toward these areas, they all started as little bitty small things that have grown, and each one of them, I love the ideas. And if you are a library listening to this and you're like, oh, I want to do this in my community, I just don't know how, talk to me. Maybe we can come up with something. Maybe there's another library out there who's trying to do the same thing, and if there are people wanting to do it, then that's the groundwork for a program. And I seem to just love giving myself more stuff to do. So please reach out to me and we'll see what we can come up with.
Well, that worked to our benefit is all I can say. Here at the Chronic Disease Bureau at the Department of Public Health and Human Services, we have benefited from what started as a very small, let's get to know each other conversation. And so much largely due to your enthusiasm and ideas was able to grow into this amazing partnership and ability to open up health options for the public and address social determinants of health. So just thank you to both of you for allowing us to be a part of all of that. And with that, I'd like to say thank you so much on behalf of Trina and myself and the crew behind the scenes. Thank you also to our fabulous guests. If you'd like more information on what was discussed today, just visit our website at talkinghealthin406.mt.gov, where there'll be links to the information that's been discussed. And if you haven't already, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. And until next time, be healthy and be well.